Okay, so this meeting is being recorded and it will be available on the HLA YouTube very soon after the presentation. I'm Gwen Sinclair and I'm the chair of the HLA Next Steps Committee. And thank you all very much for attending today's session. Next month, on March the 16th, we will be having a session about local history collections in public libraries. The speakers will be Ashley from North Kohala Public Library, Debbie Wong Ewan, who is formerly at Pahala Public and School Library, Vicki Bowie from Pearl City Public Library, and Charisse Castillo from Wahiawa Public Library. So I hope you will join us for that. I'll be sending out the invitation for that soon. The members of our Next Steps Committee are myself, Charisse Castillo from Wahiawa Public Library, Kimo Nichols, who is a student in the UHM-LIS program, and he also works at Hamilton Library with me, and Jessica Hogan, who's at the Hawaii State Library. And we have some great programs planned for you this year, but we also want to hear from you if you have ideas about programs that you would like to see, either if you have ideas for topics that you would like to have covered, or if you have an idea for a speaker, or if you yourself want to put on a program, please contact us and we would be happy to talk to you about that. And if you would like to support HLA, please visit our website. You can join, renew, donate, and see what other events are going on in HLA. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Stacey Aldrich has led the Hawaii State Public Library System since 2015, and she is responsible for the operation of the entire Hawaii State Public Library System. She was previously the state librarian in California and served as the deputy secretary for the Office of Commonwealth Libraries of Pennsylvania. And Baron Baroza is the director of the Hawaii State Library, which is the main branch of the Hawaii State Public Library System. He was previously the director of the Hawaii State Library for the blind and print disabled, and he has served in several other leadership roles in HSPLS. So I'm going to stop my sharing and let Stacey and Baron take it over. So thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get us on the right screen here. All right, can everybody see the title screen there?
Yes.
Hey, okay. Well, first of all, it's very nice to see so many friendly faces, colleagues and mentors and friends. Thank you all for joining us today. It's I was mentioning to Gwen earlier that I get just as nervous talking to 27 people as I would talking to 200 people. So thank you all, and thank you for being gentle. We appreciate that. We're here to talk about Hawaii State Library at 110. Today, you're going to hear a lot of names and dates and places and, the history of the library. But there's another side to history, right? And that's a personal history. And if you'll indulge Stacey and I for just, a couple of minutes, we'd like to tell you our personal histories with Hawaii State Library. I was born and raised here in Hawaii. I'm the second son of 4 boys. Lived in Kalihi most of my life. And growing up, it was, a bit of a challenge, as it is for most kids. When I was 8 years old, my mother passed away, and my dad at that point didn't, he wasn't really prepared to take care of 4 boys all by himself. But, he did everything he could. And one of the things he did, it was just kind of a miracle, was he decided to take all of us to the Hawaii State Library regularly. So we'd go once a week or maybe once every couple of weeks. And he'd bring us in and we'd walk into this amazing place, this grand lobby with unbelievable architecture. And, we were all amazed and awestruck. And he let us roam around and read whatever we wanted. And It was like the best time of my childhood. As I got older and was able to get around on my own, I would come to the library for, school research and that kind of thing. So the library never left me. And now that I'm the director of this library, it seems like everything's kind of come around full circle, and really nothing could be better for me than being in the position I'm in now. So I'm very grateful. And that's my personal history with Hawaii State Library. Stacey, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I have a connection. So as Gwen mentioned, I started it in 2015, but my connection to the library is that it has steel that comes from the city of my family, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and where I was born. We'll be talking about him pretty soon, but Andrew Carnegie was also from Pittsburgh, and I'll share a little bit more, but I feel connected that a little piece of where I was born is in the main library, and it's such a fabulous space. Just this expression of old and new, and so many memories that people have, and so it's nice to feel like there's a cornerstone there from again where I was from. So we'll talk a little bit more about Andrew Carnegie in a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean that's really neat, right? We can both anchor ourselves to this library in some way. Okay, so Hawaii State Library at 110 years old. In 1913, this library opened to the public. At that time, it was called the Library of Hawaii. After more than 50 years and 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and statehood, it became what we know today as the Hawaii State Library, which is the flagship of the Hawaii State Public Library system. Now, the roots of the library date back to 1875, when the Reciprocity Treaty between the Kingdom of Hawaii and the United States was signed, allowing free trade between the two nations. The most immediate result of the treaty was the boom in new sugar plantations. The treaty had a major effect on the kingdom's income, with revenue from exports tripling in just a few years. Hawaii experienced a burst of economic prosperity, with all types of workers pouring into Honolulu. Many plantation laborers spent a good deal of their leisure time in saloons. And this didn't sit very well with the powerful businessmen and officials who held Protestant missionary beliefs. So several professionals, one in particular, a London-born merchant named William Johnson, dreamt of creating a reading room for working men where they could relax and enjoy their leisure time without partaking of liquor. And so this subscription-based Honolulu Library and Reading Room Association was created. It formally opened on March 22nd, 1879, in 2 large rooms above a furniture store on Fort Street. It was there was a fee of $1 to become a member, with monthly dues of 50 cents. Now, after a lot of fundraising, they were able to build and move into a building that you see here of their own. It was located at the corner of Hotel and Alakea Streets, and they moved there in 1884. It's a 1-story fireproof structure built with the support of the Hawaiian government. It received contributions from Hawaiian royalty, including King Kalakaua, Queen Kapiolani, Queen Emma, and Princess Bernice Paua'i Bishop. The Honolulu Library served as the social and cultural center of Honolulu, holding debates and musical programs for the community, as well as giving access to many books and periodicals. The Hawaiian Historical Society started in 1892, and since 5 of their 21 charter members were longtime active members of the Honolulu Library, it was a simple matter to come to an agreement to share resources, and that's what they did. The Historical Society would be granted permanent use and control of the front room of the library, and the Honolulu Library would have access to the Historical Society's books as reference items. Toward the end of the century, the Honolulu Library was still wrestling with money problems, and then the overthrow of the monarchy came along and the establishment of provisional government, and this brought a lot of uncertainty to the future of the library. It was able to survive thanks to large gifts from benefactors like Charles Reed Bishop and the Samuel N. Castle Estates, among others. Now, efforts to establish the first free public library in Hawaii were begun shortly after Hawaii became a territory. Around this time, industrialist and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie was already well known for his contributions to library development in the United States. In 1907, Governor George Carter approached Carnegie for funds for a library building in Honolulu, and he lobbied the legislature to establish a library to serve the entire territory. Unfortunately, these attempts failed. When Carter's successor, Governor Walter Freer, took office in 1908, he personally took up the cause of obtaining a grant from Carnegie. Freer wrote a long letter asking for $200,000 for a public library building to serve the entire territory. Carnegie thought $100,000 was appropriate for a city the size of Honolulu, and he set certain conditions that needed to be met first to assure the success of the library. Stacey, did you want to jump in here? Or?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as we all know, Andrew Carnegie built a lot of libraries, and the governors knew about these opportunities to build, and asked him for the funding. And at first, he said, 100,000 is about what I'll give you for the size of Honolulu, even though the idea was to build a library that would serve all of the territory. Freer actually was able to get an act passed in 1909. I'll go to the next slide, which is Act 83, which established our Library of Hawaii. So this was the first establishment through government, and an annual operating budget of $10,000 was assigned to the library. The collection, the act also stated that the collection of the Honolulu Library and Hawaii Historical Center would become part of the Library of Hawaii. Then in May of 1909 and also November of 1909, there were agreements established between the Library of Hawaii and the Honolulu Library and Reading Room Association, and also an agreement with the Library of Hawaii and the Hawaii Historical Society. And once those agreements were signed, in those agreements, they agreed to have the collections available, but they also assigned 3 trustees to that would be appointed by the governor to the board for the new library. And then there was another trustee, a nominated trustee would be appointed from the library or from the Hawaii Historical Society. So I guess they added four trustees at the time. When all the agreements were signed, then they went back as a joint group and asked Carnegie for the funding, the $100,000. And he said it was forthcoming, but he wanted to make sure that there were all plans in place and that there was an actual spot or location established for the library. Carnegie actually joked, I told Governor Freer that if he would fulfill certain conditions, I would give him $100,000 for a library in Hawaii, but I didn't think he could do it. And now he's gone and done it, and I am stuck. So a location was decided upon. And if you all remember in history, the territorial legislature worked from Iolani Palace as in the executive building. And so the library was established at the Ho'okaina school, where the school was. The school was moved, and the library was then put on where it is today, on that corner of Punch Bowl and King. The actual architect was Henry D. Whitfield of New York. He was the brother of Andrew Carnegie. He was chosen to do this building. And in 1911, the legislature had appropriated an additional $27,000 to cover higher costs than anticipated building costs, which is pretty much what still happens today when we're building new libraries. We have to get more money. So I love this next photograph, which is a picture of October 21st, 1911. And it was the ceremony for laying the cornerstone for this new library, which you can see to the far right. you can actually see the cornerstone. And it was a big affair, as you can see. All the agreements from the three organizations were added to that cornerstone that was put at, in the corner of the building. And so the old Hawaii Library was sold to the YMCA in 1910 and was demolished to make way for the new YMCA new building. And then, as mentioned before, in 1913, the new library opened. And when you go into the library, that first space that you're in, that's the 110-year-old building. That's where all the history sits of all the people who have sat and read and listened to programs. It's amazing space, and if you listen really hard, you can still hear the whispers. Do you want to talk a little bit more, Baron, about what happened with staffing? Now we have a building. Who's staffing it?
Absolutely. So the first head librarian of Hawaii State Library was Edna Allen. She had been the librarian at the Honolulu Library and Reading Room Association since 1907. And when the new free library was built, she was selected to be the head. She established an organizational structure of 4 functional areas. They were the reference, circulation, children's, and catalog departments. On staff were 3 librarians, 2 assistants, and several pages and custodians, with more staff being added later. The library was open from Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Imagine that, Stacey. On Sunday, the library was open for several hours, but books could not be checked out. Rooms were available for group meetings and lectures, which were in constant demand at the time. And there was a small fee, and various clubs, including the Girl Scouts, met there regularly. We have a couple of interesting photos here. On the left is a photo of the Hawaii State Library lobby, circa around 1920. And as you can tell, it was Christmas time. And on the right, it's the lobby as it stands today. So as you can see, largely unchanged after more than 100 years. And this is looking in the Diamond Head direction. From 1913 to 1921, the Library of Hawaii served as an unusual combination of a city public library for Honolulu and a territorial library responsible for services throughout the islands. To service the rest of the territory, the library relied on deposit collections, or a traveling library, placed in stations in various communities and schools. In 1913, 70% of the population lived in rural areas, so many deposit collections were very much needed. Travel over land was also difficult at the time. Few people owned cars in 1913, and to travel around the island of Oahu took nearly a whole day. Just a month after opening, the library was able to distribute 329 books to 10 stations throughout the territory. 2 stations on Kauai, 2 on Maui, 1 on the Big Island, and on Oahu, there were 2 in the city and 3 stations in the rural areas. By 1915, 56 stations were established. These stations were mostly located in public buildings, such as banks and community centers, wherever space was available at no cost to the library. There was a volunteer in charge of the collection, which was changed out every 2 to 3 months. And there were also community stations placed in sugar plantations for employees and their families. If a community wanted a station of their own, they had to put in a request to the library. School libraries were virtually non-existent back then. So deposit collections were placed in public schools with books essentially for recreational reading. There were also home stations where a person could house up to 25 books at a time, and all transportation costs were assumed by the user. Books could be kept there for 6 weeks. On the island of Hawaii, there was a special arrangement for library services. The Library of Hawaii in Honolulu provided service to residents on the western side of the island by ship. The eastern side of the island was serviced by Hilo Library, which was the only branch of the Library of Hawaii at the time. Hilo Library began as the private Hilo Library and Reading Room Association. Governor Freer supported efforts to transform it into a public library. He arranged for a new site, and he stipulated that the Hilo Library would then be placed under the control of the library in Honolulu. By 1919, the Library of Hawaii was ready to support the establishment of county libraries. The station system, reaching 289 stations at its peak, was becoming cumbersome and expensive as transportation costs kept rising and books became more worn. There were already private libraries on the neighbor islands, like the Hilo Library. The Maui Library Association in Wailuku started as a private subscription library in 1912 that eventually became a free library in 1919, but lacked financial resources. So the Maui Women's Club worked hard to get an act passed to establish county libraries for all neighbor islands. And in 1921, the county library law was passed, which allowed each county to establish or contract for a public library. Consequently, the Hilo Library, which had been a branch of the Library of Hawaii in Honolulu, terminated that connection and became the Hilo Library for Hawaii County. The Maui Library Association, housed in the Alexander House Settlement building, became the Maui County Free Library. They moved to a building purchased by the county on High and Well Street, which is, I think, still their current location for the Wailuku Library. On Kauai, the Kauai Public Library Association contracted with the Kauai County to provide library services to the county. Now, the Library of Hawaii was then able to narrow its focus to Oahu and concentrate on developing its own library services. Its book collection doubled, circulation went up, and staff size increased. So plans to enlarge the library were put in place. In 1927, the legislature allocated $300,000 and purchased the land behind the library for expansion. Hawaii architects Charles W. Dickey planned two-story wings enclosing a courtyard, and construction started in August of 1928. And as you can see, this was 2 or 3 months in when this picture was taken. And for those of us who actually are here on site, we can see what is actually being built here, and that the wings are extending in the MAUKA direction from the back of the existing building. After the expansion was completed, the library grew to 64,000 square feet of floor space, effectively tripling in size. After opening, the governor and his staff, the attorney general, and the territorial budget director occupied the new space in the library, and they stayed for 2 years while their offices in Iolani Palace were being renovated. One of the most significant additions was the construction of a room dedicated to children's materials and services. It was located in the far MAUKA end of the new Diamond Head wing, and it was named in honor of Edna Allen, who was especially known for her commitment to library services for children. She invited specialists from the mainland to give lectures and training sessions on things like storytelling and children's literature. And she also worked with local schools and offered courses for teachers. She also expanded the book collection in the library to 350,000 books and worked with the territorial government to create the county libraries on each island. The children's room at the Hawaii State Library was created according to her plans, but she passed away before its completion. In 1934, Hawaii artist Juliet May Frazier was hired to paint murals of Hawaiian legends on the walls in the children's room. There are 10 different legends depicted, with additional panels showing various marine life and Hawaiian flora and fauna. Initiated during the Great Depression, this project was funded by the Works Progress Administration and the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. Frazier was paid $35 a week for her work. Now, when funds ran out, and they did, she continued working for free to complete the project. After being in place for more than 50 years, the murals began to show signs of fading and weathering and other kinds of damage. So art students from the University of Delaware completed a restoration of the murals in 1986. And these photographs show 2 of the legends depicted on the walls. As you can see, there still is some fading. It's not what it used to be, but we're still very happy to have these in our building. Now, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, the library suffered budget cuts that affected the station's department very severely. New book purchases were completely suspended and staffing and hours were cut. With no books being bought, the traveling library collections became old, worn, and obsolete. In 1931, there were 114 stations, but by 1941, that number dropped to 28. The suspension of new book purchases led to the elimination of deposit collections in schools. And by 1936, the 70 school stations were phased out completely. However, in 1935, the loss of the service was replaced by a new program, the book car service. Building on the success of Hilo's book truck service, the Library of Hawaii purchased its own car and started its own service in September of 1936. It served all but 3 rural Oahu schools, making visits every 3 weeks and holding a story hour during the visit. Also in 1935, the library partnered with Pan American Airlines to offer services to Pan Am employees on Midway and Wake Islands. So books by land, air, and sea actually became a reality. During the 4 years of World War II, the library was well used, despite the less than welcoming addition of trenches and bunkers and air raid shelters to the library's front lawn. The library also supported the war effort by providing special loans of reference books to Army and Navy intelligence and by sharing office space with assorted territorial government offices that have been displaced by the military governor's staff.
I meant the libraries were important during that time, also to keep people from getting in trouble. They wanted soldiers to spend time in the library. Yet again, not getting in trouble by hanging out at the library.
Absolutely. During this time, the library received an estimated 7,500 new patrons due to the increase in servicemen and defense workers on Oahu. The library served as a place of recreation and relaxation for soldiers and civilian military employees and dependents who were stationed here. Because many servicemen wanted to read their hometown newspapers, several publishers provided complimentary subscriptions to the library, increasing the collection to 63 titles. In the 1950s, library organization under statehood became a major concern. A constitutional convention was held in 1950 in anticipation of statehood for Hawaii. And under the constitution adopted, the number of state departments was limited to 20. Since there were nearly 50 departments in the territory at the time, it was obvious that many would have to be consolidated. The Library of Hawaii and its branches hoped and fought to have its own Department of the Libraries. By the spring of 1959, Congress approved statehood for Hawaii, and in August, Hawaii was officially admitted. And under the new state constitution, education and public libraries were considered a state function. And despite a last-ditch effort to create a Department of Libraries, in the final Reorganization Act, public libraries were placed in the Department of Education. The Board of Education became the governing board of both the public schools and the public libraries. The boards of trustees of the Library of Hawaii and of the county libraries came to an end. Instead, the governor appointed a library advisory commission for each county. The Reorganization Act also stipulated the termination of agreements between the public libraries and private organizations. The 1909 agreement between the Library of Hawaii and the Honolulu Library and Reading Room Association, which had since merged with the Friends of the Library of Hawaii, came to an end in September of 1959. The Hawaiian Historical Society had already moved out its collection in 1950 to a building it shared with the Hawaiian Mission Children's Society on Kauaiahau Road. A nationwide search was conducted for a candidate to fill the position of Assistant Superintendent of Education, which is more popularly known today as the Office of the State Librarian. In January 1962, John Eastlick was selected as Hawaii's first state librarian, but after just 10 weeks, he resigned for personal and health reasons and returned to Denver. After another nationwide search was conducted, James R. Hunt, pictured here, was selected as Hawaii's second state librarian. He began his duties in July of 1964. Hunt directed the beginnings of a library system that had no precedent, being a unified statewide library system integrated with a public school system. His first undertaking was to organize the public libraries into one state system. The Division of Library Services was renamed the Office of Library Services and divided into three components: the Administrative and Operations Branch, which was in charge of personnel, business matters, and centralized processing. The State Library Branch was basically consisted of Hawaii State Library and its services, and the Public Libraries Branch, whose purpose was to integrate statewide programs, planning, and coordination. And all the branches on Oahu and the county libraries were placed under the Public Libraries Branch. The Library of Hawaii, which was Hawaii's flagship state library, was renamed at this time to the Hawaii State Library, and its mission was to provide in-depth resources and services to the entire state. Hunt was also instrumental in the passage of the 1965 Depository Act that required copies of all state and county agency publications to be sent to the state library, which led to the creation of the Hawaii Document Center, which is housed here to this very day. A study in 1960 recommended the establishment of a centralized processing center, with the processing department of the Library of Hawaii forming the core of the new center. The center would order and process books for the library and for all public and school libraries in the state. Since space in the central library was extremely crowded, the processing department was moved into a different building. This new system would save money with bulk orders and also speed up processing time for books. The centralized processing center eventually closed in 1995 due to budget cuts, due to a reorganization, with processing duties then being delegated to the library branches themselves. Also in 1963, a beginning was made toward developing the statewide role of the Library of Hawaii, or the Hawaii State Library, in book selection. The reference librarians who selected books for the Hawaii State Library assumed the responsibility for compiling book order lists from which all public libraries were to make their selections. This was a result of the need to consolidate book orders for the new centralized processing center. In 1978, the Hawaii State Library was added to the National Register of Historic Places. And of course, that register is the official list of the nation's historic places worthy of preservation. It's part of a national program to coordinate and support public and private efforts to identify, evaluate, and protect America's historic resources. A computerized circulation system with barcode scanning began in 1983. Library staff spent a month applying barcodes to library materials and entering computer data in preparation for this change. The automated systems allowed patrons to check out materials without having to fill out paper forms and write out by hand titles, authors, call numbers, along with their name, address, and phone number. Imagine doing that every time you wanted to borrow a book. Automation also led to the reinstatement of library fines in 1985 because now they could be more easily tracked.
It's kind of interesting because it was 1983. So 40 years ago, we were barcoding, and this year we're actually doing RFID. So 40 years from 1983. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, 40 years of barcoding.
Now the switch.
Yes, indeed. So computerized catalogs were soon to come along. In 1977, the library switched to microfilm catalogs. But in 1987, a short decade later, the first computerized card catalog and circulation system was launched. The online public access catalog allowed patrons and staff to check the status and location of their library materials. Prior to this innovation, there was really no practical way to determine if an item was checked out, being mended, or lost. After more than 70 years, the building and its infrastructure had deteriorated. Wooden shelving was riddled with termites. Books were crowded into any available space, including outdoor walkways, and staff needed more space to process the overflowing collections. So despite a number of stopgap measures, such as tenting and fumigating the entire building, the library desperately needed a major renovation. In 1990, the library closed for renovations and expansion. Autani and Associates were named the architects, and G.W. Murphy Construction Company was selected as the contractor. Prior to the library's closure, there was a debate about where to house a temporary library. Neil Blaisdell Center was one possible location, but the temporary library location that was actually chosen was the existing two-story building on the site of the former Kapiolani Community College on Pensacola Street. The building included a reading room, an AV room, a children's room, staff offices, and workroom. So it worked out very well for as a temporary location. When the library reopened in 1992, it had now 107,000 square feet of floor space. There was a new rear wing, additional floor space in the basement, and the addition of a new third floor for administrative staff. Central air conditioning and handicapped access were added. Asbestos was removed. Termite damage was repaired. Electrical and plumbing work was done. The building was re-roofed, and access for the disabled was improved. Telephone reference service was started to better provide and make more convenient reference services available. More space is dedicated to the Hawaiian Pacific collection, and the serial section was moved to the basement, and compact shelving was installed to accommodate the large periodical collection. In 1996, the library received another distinguishing feature. Hawaii artist Hiroki Morinoe completed a floor mural in the central courtyard using porcelain tiles. The work is entitled Ocean Current, and if you come visit, you can see it. It basically depicts large, gentle curves leading to the different wings of the library, and tiles of different textures are used to represent the surfaces of water and land. Now, libraries, Hawaii State Library has served various functions throughout the years, beside providing access to reading material and informational services. We have kind of become a go-to venue for filming television shows. Over the years, Hawaii State Library has welcomed productions including Hawaii 5.0 in 2014, 15, and 2018. NCIS Hawaii filmed here in 2021, and Dugi Kamealoha MD filmed here in 2021 and 2022.
Wasn't there a horse involved?
No, that's right. I was supposed to put a horse picture in here. Maybe it was in like May or June of last year. The Dugi Kamealoha production came in and actually brought 2 horses into the library. So they could fit in through our service entrance, and they came in and they were actually taken through the courtyard and filmed in the courtyard for a scene where Dugi Kamealoha's father was riding the horse to woo her mother. It was like a scene from their past. And I think that's going to be shown in the new season when that comes out. But yes, there were horses, and I forgot to put a picture in here. I'm sorry.
And
Sorry.
also the Dead Files. So if you watch the Dead Files, the former New York cop who does all the research, he always films in libraries, but he doesn't actually do the research in the libraries. He just likes to look like he's researching in libraries. So he filmed at the Hawaii State Library when they did a segment here in Hawaii.
Yeah, so we got a lot of cool stuff happening here. The library has also served as a programming venue for big kickoff events like the kickoff for the summer reading program. We featured celebrities like Auli'i Carvalho and Christy Yamaguchi, and these events also have had fun activities for the whole family. And we also have done dedications here. In 2018, a bronze sculpture of Patsy Mink was dedicated. It's located in the seating area outside of the library, where Patsy Mink spent much of her time early in her career reading to her daughter. Throughout the seating area are plaques containing quotes from Patsy Mink's political career. And so we come now to the future.
So what started off as the Honolulu Library and Reading Room and was built to promote reading and education and a gathering space for people and other kinds of pursuits. There's still all kinds of opportunities as we move to the future for the library. And some of the things we're thinking about as we look at this space are how do we create a space that really can celebrate the cultural heart of Hawaii. We have so much history in this building, and we want people to be able to come and see it and to learn more about Hawaii. We're in the Capitol complex next to Iolani Palace. We think that we could do a much better job of integrating the tech and also the technology with telling stories, like telling the stories of the murals and making exhibits available on various topics that relate to Hawaii. So changing a little bit how we think about the space. Again, we're looking at doing a planning process to update the library again. We know the space, we absolutely need space to protect our most prized works, our most prized books and documents that we want to make sure are available in the future. We currently don't have a special room for these materials. So we want to be able to create that space and make it a very special space to come and do research at the library. At the same time, as we upgrade, we're looking at how do we also have maybe a cafe that people can come to? How do we create another entry point? They're going to be doing a huge project between Iolani Palace and the Capitol to create a corridor that's going to be much busier. So how do we create access from that side of the space, and how do we create it as a space that people feel welcome to keep coming in on either side? And again, incorporating information technology to help tell our stories. For example, I went to an exhibit on the last Korean emperor, and they had screens, these beautiful silk screens, and they had a giant touch screen that brought the screens alive to tell you the story of what the screens meant. So it would be really fascinating to be able to upgrade our wonderful murals and be able to tell the story of those murals. We also want it to be a place to connect and learn. Here we have a large space, but we don't have any meeting rooms for people to really meet in. So we want to create that space and continue to make it a gathering space that not only holds our stories, but continues to invite people in to continue their journey with us in the library, from Barron's memories when he was a child to be able to feel that warm hug from what it was like before, but to also feel like we're moving forward and people can easily connect. So there's lots of opportunities for us, and we continue to look for those opportunities and to work with the community to figure out what is it really going to look like.
Yes, and unless you think that all of this came out of the top of our heads, you'd be very, very wrong. Of course, this wouldn't have been possible without the assistance of these great folks. Dr. Chieko Tachihata actually wrote a thesis on the history of libraries in Hawaii, and a lot of that, the information in this presentation, came from her thesis. Linda Sueyoshi, who is the head of our Hawaii and Pacific section here, produced a presentation much like this, and we stole it from her. Kristen Laitila is the head of our Hawaii documents section, and she helped us with all of the images that you saw in this presentation. So thanks to all of these three fantastic people, and thank you to all of us for joining us today, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, mahalo to you, Baron and Stacey. Thank you so much for that wonderful overview of the State Library and library history in Hawaii. Folks, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask, or you can put it in the chat, whichever you prefer. Before we're getting lots of thank you, great presentation. Andrew Wertheimer says, thanks for an excellent review of history and sharing those photos. With those, I had not seen many of those photos, so that was really wonderful. Mahalo. Chieco's dissertation is really interesting to read. If it's literally very heavy, but yeah. So, does anybody have any questions?
Baron used to be on the radio. He was a voice on radio, and you can tell because he's also the voice of the Hawaii State Public Library System. So if you're in a branch, you may hear him giving you updates about it's time to pack up and get ready to go.
Yes, that is what I'm known for now. The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
So I have a question, just to barge in here. You know, when I think I first moved here in 1993, right after the renovation. So by now, it's been enough years since that renovation that there's probably time for another renovation. Am I right about that?
That's what we're planning for. Yeah,
absolutely.
There were some things that happened in that renovation that are unfortunate. So the mural, we lost a good couple of feet of mural because they dropped in AC, and then we removed bookcases. So the mural, there's mural and then gray paint. And so I think we really want to look at that space again and try to revive the mural. And it'd be nice if we could figure out a system that would work that wouldn't cover so much of the mural. So I think in renovating, it's also looking at how do we improve those spaces to better highlight the history in the building that was taken away by the by the new parts that were added.
Mm-hmm. And actually in the 1927 renovation, when they built the wings, that's kind of where we have the worst roof problems right now, right at the connection between the first original building and the addition that they made in 1927. So that's going to be worked on as well.
Yeah, so we have a few comments in the chat. Cindy said that one article you showed said there were 10,719 reference questions per week. I can't even imagine. That's a huge volume of questions.
Yeah, when we had when COVID was happening more actively than it is today, Hawaii State Library was closed physically to the public, but the staff was here working behind the scenes. And our telephone reference people were fielding calls left and right. It would not surprise me if they had 10,000 questions a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Andrew has his hand up.
Sure. Well, again, wanted to say thanks. That was really enjoyed the presentation. So the dissertation has a lot, but that was really without the footnotes, and certainly I think and certainly brings it up to date. And so I really enjoyed hearing that, and I love the idea of with the QR codes or something within the mural so that one can make it digitally come alive and allow people use that as a step to go and do you have a card and join the discussion and those things that I think that Korean museums and libraries are really on the forefront of making it virtual. But I just, since we're all here and we're celebrating history, I just want to make a pitch to go and encourage everyone at HSPLS to go and make sure that they're saving their history. Because the challenge I think that that you must have faced is that besides what's in it is really difficult. Not all branches and even central administration, there are a lot of things that people generations ago pitched, and so if anybody has something in their records and you work there, please share. Let central administration know. Let me know. Let Dr. Sato and those of us who are interested in and Gwen, those of us who are interested in doing local library history, and there are lots of students who'd be interested in doing it, but sometimes they're really struggling to go and find primary sources beyond those annual reports. And I did want to ask one other question, is that Stacey, you suggested something about like, were you saying like a room to appreciate the history and the artifacts, or?
So I've, as you know, I've been a state librarian in 2 states, and both states we had very specialized rooms to take care of and to allow access to our materials. And we really don't have that right now. It's pretty easy to people just walk in, and the area where we have some of our most specialized collections are not climate controlled at all. We have plastic sheets and dehumidifiers. So if we really want to protect our amazing collections of yearbooks and some of the histories that we have, we definitely need a better climate control, but we'd also like to make a special space for people to really do research in Hawaii and Pacific topics.
That's great. So just happy to hear that. And if you wanted to do something about like the history of the library specifically as kind of like a space, you know, there's some places like Boston Public Library have like a trustees room or something like that, where you have images like some of the ones that you showed. And I think it helps people to appreciate the organization, but also might be good for recruiting future local librarians and to go into the field. And if you're interested in doing that kind of thing, let us know on the LIS program, because I'm sure that we'd love to be a part of telling that story. So,
oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, so Jessica, actually, she added, she added that we had close to 1,000 questions every month during when we were closed. Sorry, I didn't interrupt. Somebody had just.
No, I was about to say the very same thing, Stacey. So thanks for jumping in there. Yeah, and Karen had mentioned telehealth rooms, and I know there, you know, there's probably a lot of demand for things like Zoom rooms and telehealth rooms and lactation rooms and that sort of thing. And they're just, it's probably a real struggle to try to figure out where to put that sort of cubes or pods or whatever in when you're already so pressed for space.
Yep. And, you know, part of it too is really thinking about, so this central library has been the library of last resort, but as collections move on and we are rethinking our spaces, we're also thinking, do we have to have offsite storage for some of our spaces where everything is sort of mail in kinds of access to some resources. So there's lots to think about as we think about the space, and how do we make it useful and yet still fulfill our goal to make sure people have access to information and ideas and history and each other's stories. So lots of opportunities. Wailuku, I see Wahiwa, there's a lot of good history conversation going on about Wahiwa. Wailuku just celebrated a couple of years ago one of their I think it was the 90th anniversary, and their librarian lived on the property with the library when they managed that library. So there's a lot of rich histories around each of these branches when we were in the county system. And so it'd be interesting to do more maybe on Hilo and some of our older libraries as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the county librarians used to be ex officio members of the HLA board back in the 1920s and 1930s. And even way back then, I think the librarian at Hilo Public Library was at one time the president of HLA. So even back then, before they had Zoom or conference calls and so forth, they figured out a way of including the librarians on the neighbor islands in the professional activities.
One thing I want to add too, we should add, Baron, to our notes. We talk about how we became part of the Department of Education because we had to be collapsed into 20 departments. But we were actually divorced from the Department of Education in 1981. So we're not a part of the Department of Education, but for the reasons that you can only have 20 organizations, when we do budgeting, our budget isn't in the Department of Ed, but we're called EDN, we're called Education, but our organization reports directly to the Board of Education, and we're not a part of the Department of Ed. So some people
Right.
often are confused by that. Even though the ledge, they're like, oh, well, you're with DOE. And we're like, no, we're not. We're a separate agency, which makes it a challenge because we're in a gray zone. We're in the executive branch, but I don't sit on the cabinet. And we're not part of Department of Ed. So sometimes we miss out because we're in this gray zone. So we have to work extra hard to get communication.
Yeah. Yeah, that 20 departments thing was something I didn't know about either. So, and Danielle mentioned that she didn't know about it either. So thanks for clarifying that for us. We're getting close to the end of the hour. So does anybody have any final questions or thoughts? Andrew says, it would also be interesting to revisit the combined school public libraries, which, yeah, that would make a great program, just looking at the history of the combined school and public, like Kahuku and Pahala and some of the other
12.
ones.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We have 12.
Yeah, they have their own unique set of circumstances and problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I would like to once again mahalo to our two presenters, Stacey and Baron. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us and give us this wonderful presentation and history of the State Library and libraries in Hawaii. And I would like to thank all of you HLA members because these programs are made possible through your support. So mahalo for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next steps. Aloha.
Thank you, everyone.
So
Thank you
nice
so much.
seeing everybody.
Take care. Aloha.